Looks like there's some new faces in the audience that I don't recognize, so welcome if you haven't been to the lectures here before. Glad to have you here. Got a couple things to add to Chris's list that are a little bit farther out, but need to know about them coming up soon. Moonlight in the Garden is second and third weekends in November. Last year it was 6 nights of sellouts, so you want to get your tickets early if you want to get in to see it. Tickets will be going on sale to the general public on September 17th. And if the university cooperates with us, member tickets will go on sale September 3rd. So if you want to make sure you get your tickets, make sure you're a member and then you can get them. You are allowed to sign up as a member when you get your ticket, so you can do it all at once if you want. But keep those dates in mind. Also for members, we'll be sending out our members only pre-order plant sale list pretty soon, so you can get a head start on getting some plants for this fall. I think that was it. Sound good? All right. Well, I'm very excited about this. I've never been to Canterbury Cathedral, so I'm really looking forward to hearing about this. Philip Oostenbrink has been the head gardener at Canterbury since 2015. We just celebrated our 40th anniversary a couple years ago. I think I heard him say that the gardens there have been going on for 1,000 years now, something like that. But I had a brother who did a semester in London, and he called me his first day and said, I'm living in an apartment that's older than the United States, and it's just an apartment, You get 50 years in the U.S., and we slap a plaque on it, and it's historic. Got a lifelong love of plants, like I'm sure many of you did. After finishing horticultural college in the Netherlands, he did a teaching degree in horticulture at higher education level, and taught horticulture at the secondary school in the Netherlands for 8 years, so he is nothing if not brave. In 2008, he moved to the UK and did gardening there for himself for a few years, then became deputy head gardener at a land-based college garden. His love of gardening and love of history brought him to the Canterbury Cathedral, where he and his team look after 24 acres of green spaces. Most of the gardens are private, so if you visited Canterbury Gardens, you probably did not get to see most of the gardens there, so you're going to get a peek in behind the scenes. Philip has 3 national collections. Cloa, which we don't do very well with, although I've got a few at my house that are limping along. Aspidistra elatior cultivars and Ophiopogon japonicus cultivars, which we do much, much better with. He's also setting up a national collection of magnolias that are bred by Amos Pickard, who is nearby, and that gets exciting because we do have a national collection of magnolias here. He's also a committee member for plant trials at the Royal Horticultural Society and plant collections coordinator for plant heritage, assessing existing national plant collections and assisting in setting up new ones. He also opens his private tropical home garden for charity. This tropical home garden was filmed by BBC Gardener's World in September 2018 and aired in May 2019. So very exciting. Is that online anywhere still?
Yeah, there is a thing on YouTube somewhere.
All right, everything exists online. So we'll do that. So please help me welcome Philip Oostenbrink.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. You've also saved the next slide already, because it's mainly what you've been talking about, so it's good. I'm Philip Oostenbrink, head gardener at Canterbury Cathedral, and as Mark said, I've done that since 2015. I'm really enjoying it. I've got a team of 5 gardeners. They're all planty people as well, which is just nice if you are a plant collector yourself and other people in your team are also really enthusiastic about that, then that just works really well. See, normally I don't even show this picture because I always say to people, I assume you've been to Canterbury Cathedral. Well, I know some of you have been to Canterbury Cathedral here, but this is Canterbury Cathedral. And Canterbury Cathedral, or Canterbury, is about an hour from London if you go east towards Dover. then Canterbury is in Kent, and yeah, high-speed rail now, so yeah, an hour to London is quite good. It is the mother church of the Anglican Church because it was also the first one that was really built in the UK. But I'll tell you a bit more about that in a minute. I have to say, PR almost didn't allow me to show this picture because at the moment it doesn't really look like this. We're in a massive project and there's loads of scaffolding on the side. All these green bits here, that's all a compound now where they're doing loads of work as well. So if you go next week, don't say, well, it doesn't look like the picture. Wait for another 2.5 years and then you can say. Yeah. Oh no, I don't have to point. Shall we do the lights? So Mark discreetly goes behind the screen.
Pay no attention to me behind the screen.
Yeah. Well, this is more or less what Mark already told you. I was a teacher of horticulture at the secondary schools of 12 to 16-year-old boys. In the Netherlands, there are different levels of secondary school. Some of the levels, they get more practical lessons as well. So horticulture is one of them, floristry will be one of them. They do cooking, all sorts of things. Animal care, for instance, as well. So that was the school I was teaching at, and horticulture was quite a big part of that. So it was a land-based secondary school. I moved over to England in 2008, mainly because I loved the country. Even before I'd ever been to England, I always watched BBC Gardener's World and just saw this Jeff Hamilton. I am of the Jeff Hamilton era. But I just loved it. I was fascinated with the country, and that's why I just wanted to move, and I wanted to move there. So I moved there in 2008. I was a self-employed gardener for 3.5 years. It was quite nice after 8 years of teaching at a school which had probably about 800 pupils at the end of the time I was there. Just to be by yourself for a while is quite nice then. But after 3.5 years, I did miss working with people because you see your clients sometimes and you just think, yeah, it's maybe sometimes 5 minutes, and I just missed working in a team. So that's why I started working at the College Garden as deputy head gardener. And after I'd been there for 3.5 years, I applied for a job at Canterbury Cathedral. And there is no secret system of becoming a head gardener at Canterbury Cathedral. You do just apply for the job. There's a website, horticulture jobs, and it was on there and I applied. I think I was up against the head gardener of Leeds Castle. I'm collectionist coordinator and chairman for the Kent Group of Plant Heritage. And Plant Heritage is an organisation in the UK who run all the national collections, and I was talking about that today actually. I keep on wanting to say in the Netherlands. In the UK, the national collections are slightly different than here because even a private person can just have a small national collection of a particular plant. You could have it on your windowsill even. There is a minimum amount of plants you need, but yeah, technically you could have that. I started one of my national collections on my balcony, so that's how it can be. And as collections coordinator, I check existing collections in Kent, which are about 41 collections at the moment, and also if someone wants to start up a collection, then I'll help them with that, which usually means that I type out all their lists, because that's the bit they don't want to do. But yeah, that's that organisation, the charity who runs that. So you have to be a member of Plant Heritage, which is only £36 a year, and then you could start a national collection. And I'm a committee member at the Trials at Wisley, and that means that, I don't know if you have the system here, but we have awards of garden merit. So some plants will have that on their label, and that means that a plant has been through one of those trials at Wisley, and Wisley is the Royal Horticultural Society's headquarters, and they've got trial fields there, a bit like they have here. They've got the zinnia here, for instance. And at the moment I'm looking at lilies, so for 3 years we'll go up to the field, have a look at the lilies once every fortnight in June and July, and discuss in the group, well, we really like that one, that is a good performer. So eventually, if something has an AGM, then you can rely on it as a reliable, good garden plant that's tolerant and yeah, doesn't have many diseases and everything. So that's what we're looking at. That's what. But anyway, you're here for the cathedral, it's enough about me. So let's do a picture. A bit more history actually. This is about when the monastery was there, but In 597 is when the first church was built on the site that is now Canterbury Cathedral, 597 AD. The land was actually given by King Ethelbert and Queen Bertha to Augustine, who came from Rome and wanted to reintroduce Christianity, or boost it a bit in the UK. And so before 597, it was palace grounds. And King Ethelbert and Queen Bertha, they moved to North Kent, which the courtiers didn't really like because it wasn't as nice as in Canterbury. But before that, there must have already been gardens as well. And the first gardens around the monastery would have been about produce. So to grow their own produce, there would be vegetable gardens, herb gardens of course, but even orchards, just to grow their own food really. And this is a plan, I say we have, it's actually at Cambridge University, and it's what we call the waterworks. This is a 12th century plan of the cathedral, the precincts. And if I can find the button, yes. This here is the cathedral. Because at the time they would draw the building from the side and almost fold it down. So nowadays you'd have a black line, which is a wall, a white bit is a door or a window, but then they would draw it from the side. So that big one on the left there is the cathedral. These are the great cloisters, which are still around today. Here, this area here is what they had as a herb garden. And this here is a water tower, and it is the waterworks plan, because all these lines here, they're slightly pinkish and yellow and green. They're all the monastic drains and the monastic pipes that would also feed the monastic buildings with water. And of course going into the water tower, you may have guessed. So that was what this was about. But if you look at it, so the herb garden is already on there. But also you can see some trees here. There are some trees here. These are probably fruit trees with wheat growing there as well. And this is the monastic wall, so that's the end of the precincts and around. And so it shows that as well. So of course there would have been some sort of vegetation around. Another thing that's quite nice on here is this here. And here it says piscina, upside down. And that was the carp pond, so where the monks would grow carp to later eat as well. So it was all for produce, even the carp pond. And this, so this plan, as I said, it had the drains. Those monastic drains are still in use today. So if you get loads of rain, then all the water that falls on the cathedral comes off the cathedral, goes down those monastic drains, and eventually ends up in the river Stour. So they're still in use, and some of them are quite big. I am a tall Dutchman, so I can't really stand in them, but if you're a slightly shorter Englishman, so you can stand in some bits of them. Yeah, they are still being used and being restored, and just to make sure that they stay all right. But they also had their own spring, and we still own that spring. It's not actually on the cathedral site, but it's this little building, and it's about a mile from the cathedral, and it's in a not a very nice area really. It's sort of tucked away, and you wouldn't just walk past it because it's really out of the way. And it's this building, and you can see some bits on there. So like this is 12th century. That is more Victorian. It's a restoration they did at some point. I think the bitumen was 1980s. So they do change bits sometimes, but just to keep it going, of course. But we go there as gardeners once every 3 years because there are some brambles there, nettles and everything, and we just try to hack everything back. And especially ivy can grow over it as well. And of course we don't want ivy going into the walls and just getting all the flints off. Especially with those ancient walls, it really grows into them, and it will just fall apart. This was last October, so almost, not quite a year ago, but 10 months ago. And I also managed to find the key, because normally you can just about see a big metal door there. And last time we went, I couldn't find the key, but I found it. Well, I don't actually have the key, someone else had it, so they could find it. But you can just see the front here of this basin, which is like a basin to collect that water. And when I went in with the archaeologists of the cathedral, we looked, and the water was actually still flowing. So in the 12th century, that spring was flowing, and nowadays it's still going. Unfortunately, we don't get the water from it anymore because at some point they had gasworks down in Canterbury somewhere, and they cut through the pipes, and that's, I think, why they cut a little pipe off here, because otherwise someone's basement might just fill up with water a bit, especially as it is still flowing. But really beautiful, clear water. Great shame we don't get it anymore. So that was that one. This plan here is one we have in our own archives. I think the library at Canterbury Cathedral has about 40,000 books in it, different book collections, but this is in our own archives, and it is, so this is 1580s. It's probably about A4 size, if you see it in real life. There are quite a few bits in the archives. One of them is a bishop's toe, which I haven't got a picture of, but I have got a picture of this one. And I just like showing this picture because it shows how green Canterbury is, or was at least. You see the cathedral just up there, with the precincts wall that I pointed out earlier. Now in the 12th century, the priory actually bought the last bit of land that went right up to the city wall. So we now have all of that, and that's at 23.5 acres that is owned by Canterbury Cathedral. You can see how green it is and how green the city itself is as well. And I think as Canterbury Cathedral, we are really lucky to have so much greenery around the cathedral. The total site is 23.5 acres, so it's not all garden. There is quite a big building in the middle as well, of course, so it takes a bit of the acreage away. But as a cathedral, we're really lucky to have all those green spaces. Because sometimes if you go to a cathedral in England, they might just have the lawn around the cathedral and that's it. And all the other buildings have been sold off during the centuries. But in Canterbury it is still within those precincts walls, and that's all part of Canterbury Cathedral. And the precincts actually are still locked every day and opened at, I think it's 8 AM in the morning, and they're locked again at 9 in the evening. So it's one of those old traditions in there. But that just shows that it is still its own little community there. So we're really lucky to have that. So this was an image from our own archives, and the one on the left here is one as well. And it is a receipt, and it is of course garden related, because otherwise I would probably not show it. But it is a receipt for planting 26 oak trees within the precincts. I think those oak trees, that is pure guessing, but I think those oak trees might have been planted in an area where that car pond used to be, because that is now a car park, and it is called the Oaks Car Park, even though there are all lime trees all over it, which you call them, Tilia, what is it? Linden, yeah, that's it. So, yeah, it doesn't really make sense to call that the Oaks Car Park, unless one of the head gardeners before just wasn't really good with plant hygiene, but it is quite a large open space, so that it would make sense to plant things there in that space. But it's so it's from 1663, 26th of November 1663, and I love this because, well, it is part of the garden history, of course, which is really nice to find something that old in there. I mean, if I go to our local nursery to get plants for the cathedral, usually by the time I get to the cathedral, I would not know where the receipt is. So and there's something from 1663 has actually survived. I find that rather amazing. But the other thing that is quite good about it, and I'm sure everyone who works at a nursery wants to reintroduce that, is they got drinking money. And they didn't get it once, they actually got another lot, and it doubled as well. And of course, when you finish a job, so it's really something that I think that tradition should really be brought back to Canterbury. So far, HR hasn't agreed. So we just go out after work on a Friday sometimes if we planted a tree. The image on the right is something that is from the Canterbury collection, which is a really good website. Lots of information about Canterbury itself, but also about the cathedral, of course. There's lots of history about that. But I like showing that image because it shows people working on the road. This is sort of the area where the car pond is. This is the east end of the cathedral, so the opposite end of where you would enter, with the corona in the background there as well. But two gentlemen working on the road, and yeah, just making sure everything's all right, of course. This is Victorian, so probably 1850s, because we've got quite a few pictures of that. But I find it quite important to show this because it shows that people have always worked around the building, of course, and even during the monastic times, it wasn't like the monks would do everything. They still had support staff, so the monks did have chores and would have to do things. But yeah, the grounds and of course the building itself was built upon by stonemasons, so they had a lot of support staff. And that is something that is still around. The monks, of course, are no longer in the building, but the support staff is still there. There's still the clergy as well, so you've got the dean, the archdeacon, all those people who mainly work within the church. But outside of that, well, in total, we have 350 people working at the cathedral, as in paid work, plus about 600 volunteers. One of those is a garden volunteer, garden research volunteer. But the other 599 will work somewhere around the cathedral, in the cathedral, welcoming people, helping out with services, all those things. But if you look just within the department where the gardeners sit in, we are part of the works department. And in the works department, there's also the works maintenance department, and there will be painters, electricians, carpenters, plumbers. All those trades are represented within that department. I think there's about 36 people working in there, because they look after all the buildings also around the cathedral. And there are the stonemasons, of course, especially with the big project we're doing at the moment. I think we've got about 40 stonemasons working for us. And yeah, and then there's all the other people who work in the shop and the hotel and all that. Yeah, so quite a few people working there. And yeah, it might also not surprise you. It's not just pay, of course, but it costs about £19,000 a day to keep the cathedral open. And I can assure you it's not all pay. It's also just, yeah, maintaining the building and all those other things as well. So that's quite amazing. Now the next image I have is another plan of Canterbury, and the big black dot there, of course, that is the cathedral. The precincts go around like that, so everything within that is all owned by Canterbury Cathedral. And although we are the mother church of the Church of England, we are separate from it, so we don't get any money from the Church of England or from government or anything. Everything is through selling tickets at the gate or private donations and like that as well. But here on this plan, you can see that some of the gardens within, they become a bit more ornamental, because of course at some point it went from produce, just pure produce, to also becoming a bit more ornamental gardens, because more produce was just brought in. And one of the gardens here, you can just see the cross, so that's quite ornamental there as well. There it is, the oaks, it says. So I'm hoping that's where those oaks went. Yeah, so that's that one. And if you just look outside the city wall, so here is the city wall, but here, these bits, these stripes, they're all hop fields. And in Kent, they produce a lot of hop. The National Collection of Hop is also in Kent, funnily enough. But all these other little trees here, and here, for instance, they all represent orchards. And if you would go to Canterbury now, all of those areas are built up. So that has changed quite a bit. Now the next image, or images even, are again Victorian images. The one on the left is of a glass plate, and it really shows, well, the Victorian ladies in the long dresses and everything. If you would go into the cathedral, you would sort of walk in there. These buildings on the left are still the same, because of course it's all listed, so anything that needs maintenance is just put back as it was. Yeah, it just shows people enjoying the area around the cathedral, which it's not always people going for services, of course, but you can also just wander around the cathedral and just enjoy the big open spaces around there. The image on the left is quite an important one, because well, hopefully by the time I get back, they've started reinstating this wall. It was knocked down when they built the lodge, and because of the project we're doing, it's a lottery-funded project, and one of the conditions was that that wall would be reinstated, which I think is really good, because then at least you can see what the precinct should have looked like, really, and how it has looked like, what it has looked like for centuries. So that's quite good. On the right-hand side, that's the water tower that I pointed out earlier. It's now a Sunday school. But it's also very Victorian, because there's loads and loads of ivy growing up the walls. And the Victorians loved ivy growing everywhere, and yeah, we're now trying to get everything off again, because it does damage that old stone. And the water tower itself is 12th century, so yeah, you sort of need to preserve that. But just the gentleman enjoying the outside space there. Now the next image, I was saying to Chris earlier, that was a £1 postcard from eBay, this one. But I love this one because it shows how green the Canterbury Cathedral site is, so all the precincts are. This here is the city wall, so that's the end. And this here is, that's Burgate, Christchurch Gate, where you normally walk in. It's just behind Belharry, and then it goes around. And you can see within Canterbury what a green oasis that is. And we do try to encourage wildlife as well, and be like a wildlife haven as well, by leaving log piles for our stag beetles, for instance, and having bees, all sorts of things. But this image also shows the private gardens, because there are some areas that are public, so some of the gardens you can go in, if you just buy a ticket and you can go through, or if you're there for a service you can just go through. But we have clergy living on site, like the Dean for instance, and they have quite a large garden, and that will mean that we look after that garden. Now the most important one is the Dean, because he is in charge of Canterbury Cathedral, and let me look, this is his garden here. So it's that's 2 acres. That is the biggest one. And he's got one full-time gardener as well. Now there's a tiny one here, which is the Canon Treasurer's garden, little secret garden. The Canon Librarian lives here, and he sort of has this bit as well when his grandchildren are over. And then there's the Archdeaconry. That's my favourite garden. And when the Archbishop is in residence, that's his garden. And this here is the Canon Missioner's garden. And that is probably about an acre as well, that one. And our yard is just at the back, so the gardener's mess room is at the end of the garden. I briefly mentioned the Archbishop, I said when he is in residence, because although he's the Archbishop of Canterbury, he's not actually in charge of Canterbury Cathedral at all. The Dean is in charge of Canterbury Cathedral. Of course, when the Archbishop comes over, I don't say, no, I'm not going to do what you're saying, what you're telling me, or what you're asking me, although he's not very demanding at all, but he's very nice. But yeah, he is a guest when he's with us. So the Dean is really in charge of Canterbury Cathedral, and normally the Archbishop lives in London, in Lambeth Palace. Yeah, so that shows all those private gardens. And if you look here, you can just see a little square with a little round, little red circle in there as well. This image is late 1960s probably, and this design is also late 1960s. And that little circle I just pointed out is this bit here, and that bit here. So it's not quite as old as the other things, it's only 1960s. But it is quite nice to find an original plan of an area, because if I go back once, this area here, especially these bits, that used to be the Dean's stable yard up until about 100 years ago. So then they converted into housing. Teachers from King's School will live there, or clergy will live there, old canons for instance will retire there. And in the 1960s they made this design. And it was quite nice to see this design, because I also thought, oh, it might be good to see what they planted, and then maybe we can reinstate that. Because when I started there was a rockery there, which you can actually see in this design. This is the rockery. And rockery at Canterbury Cathedral means 12th century stone usually. So there are bits that have come off the cathedral that they couldn't restore. Yeah, they're all in there as well, and this is the rockery here as well. But it tells you on either side which plants they put in. And all the plants were annual bedding, because it was quite popular in the 1960s. But with annual bedding, there's nothing wrong with it, but it is a lot of maintenance, because you have to plant it all out in spring, you have to make sure you get weeded all the time, watered all the time, especially in a rockery that's draining like anything, of course. And it is an area which is quite private. Only the people who really live there, which is maybe 4 people live in that area, they will see it. And personally, I would rather spend more time in the area that's more open to the public, so more people can enjoy it, really. So we didn't reinstate that, but instead we bought plants that are good for pollinators, so things like salvias, rosemary, oregano, for instance, as well. Things with open flowers, just to enhance the habitat as well for the wildlife and the foragers. So that's what we've done in there. And this is what it looked like. Well, the one is in spring, of course, tulips. I am Dutch, so we have introduced a lot of tulips. And on the right hand side, that is that rockery, where you can see this is really nice salvia called Royal Bumble, bright red. And yeah, iris as well, Loup de Loup is in there, beautiful iris, blue edge. So that's what we've done in there. And I always show this because I think it's quite important to show that we are not bound by a lot of rules as gardeners at the cathedral. When I had my interview, I thought, oh, it's probably quite strict and we have to stick to a certain era maybe, you know, things like that, and we can't be too out there. But then I walked around the Deanery and I saw massive banana trees and hedychium, ginger lilies, things like that. And I did say to the Dean that I was quite surprised to see that after I passed my probation. And I said, and he said, yeah, he thought it was quite important that the building was more or less the same throughout the centuries, and that things around there did go along with the time and yeah, with the fashion as well. And also, he said, it is difficult to pinpoint a time, because if you look at Canterbury Cathedral, there's so much history there. If you say we have to plant everything like the monks had it, so loads of vegetables, things like that, then you're really skipping 1,000 years of history in that entire cathedral's life. So why would you go for that? Why would you not go to the Victorians, for instance? Let ivy grow up everywhere and make everything ruinous, so take bits off, like that. So that's, those were the reasons, really, that we have a free hand in just planting things, which, as planty people, is quite nice. So we do try a lot of new things and yeah, make nice borders with quite modern planting. Now, just going back to this image, just very briefly, if you look very closely, but I will tell you, it says bowling green there. And that was the Dean's private bowling green. The Deanery is this sort of triangular bit here, that's his garden. And nowadays still, if you walk right down the garden, at the end there's a door, and the key is under the brick, of course. And you go through, and that is called the Dean's Walk. And we've now sown loads of wildflower mixes in there for the butterflies and the bees. But normally, the Dean would walk through there and could play bowls on the bowling green. But in the beginning of the 20th century, after the First World War, it was opened up to the public as a memorial garden for the fallen of the First World War. So it is no longer a bowling green. And this is what it looked like in the 1950s and 1960s, which might have even been the same head gardener as the other design, because you can see all bedding all around here, and even around the yew trees, there's loads of bedding there as well. This arch here, the Victorians moved that, because that used to be halfway down the precincts and was the old entrance into the monastery. So you had to have business in the monastery if you could go, if you wanted to go through there. The wall here is part of the old monastic walls, because this bit, sort of behind us, is the city wall. So that is that bit that the priory bought in the 12th century to have it right up to the city wall. And on that wall, you can see in the picture on the right, there's a massive wisteria. And that is a couple of 100 years old at least. Some of the stems are like that, quite hollow as well. And it actually doesn't grow in the ground, it grows in the wall. So I always hope the surveyor of the fabric doesn't say one day, we need to do something about that, because I will probably chain myself to it. But it is beautiful, and this was 3 years ago, in May, probably, middle of May, and it was completely blue, and people actually sit on the bench there and have their picture taken, and yeah, it's really beautiful. But of course, wisteria also smells like cloves, so you get that scent going all around that garden. And it's a walled garden, so it's quite a nice little microclimate in there as well, and yeah, you can just, the scent just lingers around. And that is something that we still use, so we do plant a lot of things in there that have winter scent mainly. Chimonanthus, the winter sweet, is nice. Christmas box is a good one as well. Of course, mahonias go in there, daphnes go in there, all those plants that add more scent to that garden. Because although it's quite a long way away from the main entrance, this is probably the most used bit of the cathedral, because through here every day there are about 800 pupils from King's School walking through, because they have their lessons on the cathedral site as well. It's also an area where we still do burials. If you're part of the congregation, then you can get your ashes interred in this in the lawns here as well. Because of course, we're not a tourist attraction in the sense we are still a working church. So we have got loads of services, funerals, weddings, all those things going on as well within the cathedral site. And burials is one of them. Yeah, so that's that. I showed you the bedding in the 1980s, for instance. I think they were looking at that centre as well. There was a rose garden in there, and that shows again how it's gone along with the fashion. And nowadays they are mixed borders. So in spring, guess what? Loads of tulips, snowdrops, and then now it's loads of perennials and some roses in there as well. But yeah, just mixed borders with all sorts of plants in there. Now the first private garden I was going to show you is the Archdeaconry. And the Archdeacon is, well, she lives at Canterbury Cathedral. It is a beautiful garden. It's right in the centre of the precincts. But she looks after all the churches within the diocese. So she will appoint new vicars, for instance, and she looks after the finances for them and all those things. So she works off-site a lot. And she has got duties within the cathedral, but her task is mainly within the diocese outside of the cathedral. The previous archdeacon was Archdeacon Sheila, and not everyone liked her. I actually really liked her, but she was quite strict. Because she didn't just want people coming in and say, oh, we need to fix your boiler or check your boiler or something like that. No, you had to make an appointment, which I think is fair enough. And in the garden, she also didn't want us to just plant things, because a lot of the borders have been thought out by a friend of hers who is a garden designer. So she did lots and lots of work, or she had lots and lots of work done in the garden. And one of the things that she thought of, and we still do today, is how we cut the lawn, because you may have noticed that the stripes aren't very straight. And Archdeacon Sheila looked out of a window one day and saw this big yew tree, which is about 100 years old. And she just imagined that was a big pebble in a pond, with the lawn being the pond. And that's when she asked the gardener to cut in circles around the yew tree. So it's that ripple effect, which is actually really effective. And even at ground level, you can guess what it's about. And if you're on top of Belharry, it's very nice as well. But that was one of the things. And it is quite difficult. You think, oh, straight lines is quite difficult, but going in circles around a tree like that and not ending up on the next one, it's quite difficult sometimes. That's good. She had the borders at the back redesigned, and I think I've got a picture of those here. Yeah. So those on the top right are those borders. Variegated box cones. There are dark leaf dahlia called Fascination is in there with beautiful fuchsia coloured flowering. Some lavender. This is actually the back walls are the cloisters. So you go down the garden and you can get into the cloisters. There's an area here which is quite Japanesey. There's even a Japanese Zen pit just on the right-hand side of this picture. The current archdeacon uses it as a patio, but it used to be a Zen pit with the rake. And Archdeacon Sheila also loved black flowers. So that's when I got a tulip called Paul Scherer, or Paul Scherer if you're Dutch. And that is just a beautiful dark tulip. Bit like Queen of Night, but much darker, much more towards black and really nice and glossy as well. So really good tulip, if you like black flowers. I do. Not everyone does, of course. But she loved it, and she hated yellow flowers. And Archdeacon Sheila, so one morning, or maybe a Sunday even, someone from the congregation came up to her and gave her this massive bag of daffodils. And she said, yeah, I can't, well, not to her, of course, but she said to the gardener, I can't just bin them, of course, we'll have to plant them somewhere, but I hope they won't flower. So behind this bench, you can just see there's a little wall, and there's a tiny border, and there's a massive wall next to it with loads and loads of ivy on it. So it's probably drier than the Sahara Desert down there, so she said, plant them there. And then, of course, they did come up. But it was so bad. She hated yellow so much that if they would come out with a flower, that she would ask the gardener to pinch out the flower buds. Yeah, that's how much she hated yellow flowers. Bit extreme. But there is a good ending to this story, because the new Archdeacon is from New Zealand. She's really lovely, Archdeacon Jo, and she loves colour. And so we've planted yellow tulips in the front garden, really nice, West Point, good one. But also because those daffodils had been pinched out for all those years, they bulk up and they bulk up, of course, and they flower like anything now. So Archdeacon Joe is quite happy with the yellow daffodils, and we didn't kill them. So that's that one. Beautiful copper beads there as well. And you can just see on the right-hand side of the left picture, you can see the west towers of the cathedral. Because from Archdeacon Joe's garden, you can see the entire cathedral, which is quite a nice folly to have in your back garden, I think. Quite good. But it also shows that, well, through this story, of course, that yeah, if someone new moves in, so if a new archdeacon moves in, they can have certain wishes, like, oh, I'd like to change that a bit or that a bit, and it is budget depending, of course, because we can't just throw money in those gardens. But yeah, we can change certain things to the taste of the person who lives there, and sometimes they don't want any involvement at all. This archdeacon, the new one, she loves the garden, but she asked for a lemon tree, so we got her a lemon tree for gin and tonics or something. So yeah, that happens, and sometimes they have a bit more of an influence. It's just quite good. So it's almost like you're a self-employed gardener who has several clients, which is quite nice. Now, next to Archdeacon Joe's garden is the herb garden now, but it used to be the monks' dormitories, and after the Reformation, or at the Reformation, anything that the monks used to live in or to work in was demolished. So that's why the dormitories were taken down completely, just so they couldn't move back in, basically. And so it was already ruins, but in the Second World War, a massive bomb hit that area, and it actually hit the dormitory and the archives. So the archives building was redone in the 1950s. And that same aircraft had another big bomb, and they were the biggest ones that were dropped on the southeast of England. And the other one dropped on the other side of the cathedral, with the cathedral still intact in the middle. So that was quite lucky. And for most of the 20th century, it was just rubble, and then they put lawn in. You couldn't actually walk through it. But some of these columns here, so like this one, that's a bit in there as well, they are still the bases of the 12th century columns. So of those dormitories, and they were the vaults. You can just see there at the end what it was like all the way down as well. And in 2004, the then head gardener put in a proposal to Dean and Chapter, which you have to do if you want to make a big exchange. And they wanted to turn it into a herb garden, which is one of the best public spaces. It's really nice and tranquil. It's on the north side of the cathedral, just out of the way a bit. And what they did, they dug these little squares all around the columns, and they put herbs in there. And when I started, I loved it, but some of the things I thought, oh, is that a herb? Like iris? Do you know what to use that for? It's actually a herb. So I looked it up, oh yeah, eat my words. It is used in the perfume industry still, and it was used for like incense and all those things as well. So yeah, it is a herb, so left that one in. But I wanted to do, I wanted to have more herbs in there that were actually around, or they knew of the use when the monks were there as well. And we have quite a nice book for that, and it is the Gerard's Herbal from 1597 that I've used for that. So not quite as old as the cathedral, but quite old. It's a beautiful book. We've got that in our library. It's about that big, really thick, and it's a very important herbal. Before Gerard's Herbal, so before 1597, there was Turner's Herbal as well. Of course, also an important one, but with Turner's Herbal, all the images were still woodcuts. So with the flowers or with the plants, you can hardly recognize what they are. And with this, especially with the picture on the right, I hope you know that's hop. You don't live in Kent, I suppose, so you might not. That's hop. And if you look at the picture here, you could probably work out that that was hop. And it's called lupulus here. And now it's called humulus lupulus. So yeah, you can sort of work that out as well. But it was so important because it had that beautiful drawing of the plant, but it also told you where you could find the plant. So if you wanted to have one or needed one, where to go. It also tells you what to do with it, so what you could use it for, and sometimes it would be medicinal, sometimes it would be pigments, or all sorts of things. And then also how to use it. So what did you need to do to actually get the use out of it? With hop, it says the Germans added to beer. and then 400 years later they started doing that in, or maybe not quite 400, several hundred years later they started doing it in England as well. So that's why it's such an important one. So it was almost like a recipe book, how to turn it into an ointment, all sorts of things. And that's what we've used to get different herbs in that herb garden and to try and make it a bit more authentic. So that is an area where I've actually looked back at monastic times and see what we could plant in there. Mandrake is one that I really want. So that's that one. The herbal is also important for two other herbs that appeared in it, and the first one is this one. Do you recognise it? Yes, it is a potato. Just in case, that's potato. And you can see the tubers there, the flower there, and the berry there as well. So sometimes you see them on potato plant, but of course it looks a lot like tomato. Related, of course. And this is the first ever image of potato plant that was published in Europe. And that's in that herbal. Because this was just after Drake's voyage, and that's when those potatoes were discovered. And it actually tells you loads about the plant, where they found it, all those things. And then there's a little footnote at the bottom saying the natives also eat the tubers. So it's slightly different now. And it does always make me laugh, because when they first introduced potatoes into Europe, wealthy people had them. So rich aristocracy would grow them and would invite all their friends over on a good evening when they were in flower, and then show that amazing plants that they couldn't afford. And botanical gardens had them, of course. We do grow them in herb garden as well. The gardeners do enjoy eating them, but so the native gardeners. They would grow it as an exotic plant. Just such an amazing thing. Look at this unusual flower, and now I drive home and I see acres and acres full of potatoes, and you just think, well, if only they could have seen that, it would have been amazing. So that was quite an important one, of course, in that herbal. And the other one is this one, and I saw a few fields of it yesterday. Tobacco is this one. So also the first ever image of a tobacco plant that appeared in this herbal. Now, the next private garden I'm going to show you a few bits about is the Deanery garden. And the Deanery garden has been re-landscaped quite a bit since the last, this Dean moved in, Dean Robert. And again, it can change a bit. The Deanery garden is actually, although it's private, it's used a lot because they'll have functions in there. Sometimes the Queen of Denmark has lunch, people like that. They will use the garden to have lunch if it's a nice day. And on the picture on the left, you can see that it's quite a lot of lawn. On the right-hand side, you can just about make out a tiny border in there where they've put some little plants in. That's a Victorian image. But nowadays, it looks like this. Slightly different. It is a beautiful view of Belharry as well, which is the main tower. And they are all David Austin roses, well, mainly, probably 99% are David Austin roses with box hedging around. Because the current dean, he loves roses, and he did request a rose garden in the front. Thinking it was quite original, and then you go back a few centuries and you see there was a rose garden in the front, so it does sometimes repeat itself. But of course David Austin roses are very scented, they're quite disease tolerant as well. They're quite good growers, although sometimes they can flop over a bit, but yeah, there's box hedging around, so it's quite good. But it does mean that we don't have to spray them that often. So if we spray them with something organic called SB Invigorator, which is a seaweed-based spray that also boosts the health of the plant. And a lot of the roses have got their names have got something to do with church life or cathedral life as well. There is Thomas Becket, which was actually bred by David Austin for the cathedral, because Thomas Becket was murdered at the cathedral. Winchester Cathedral is a white rose you may have heard of. And there's Brother Catfile. Have you heard of Brother Catfile? See, some people have, Joe. More to do with Alice Peters, I suppose, than any church life really, but it is a beautiful rose, almost like a peony. If you look behind these roses, you can just see a little yellow tree there, but there are about 10 trees in a very, very small area. Probably one of those trees would have been enough. It's also right on top of the domestic drains, which is a bit annoying because they do grow through. But there is a reason there are so many trees there, because the Dean's chickens are under this weeping willow here, and they do sometimes roam around the garden, but up there is the peregrine falcon, and they do really like chickens, so they've got somewhere to hide. So once the chickens have moved on, then we might start thinning it out of here. But yeah, that's how that has changed, so a bit more planting at the front. And if we walk around the Deanery, this is the back of the Deanery, back of the building, and there's a yellow Banksia rose growing right up to the top of the medieval tower on the left, and it is one of the Dean's favourite spots, because between those two towers, so between this one and this one, there's a patio area, and it gets the sunshine first thing in the morning, even in like February. So if it's quite a nice clear day in February, you can have your morning tea there, breakfast, and there's quite often there has meetings as well. On the right hand side, the yellow Banksia rose as well. Very, very scented. Again, that scent of cloves. And you can just see on the far end, on the right picture, picture on the left, a wisteria, and that goes all along a wall that goes all along their path. So when they're both out at the same time, the scent is just amazing in there. Doesn't always happen. Sometimes one is earlier than the other, but the last few years they have been out at the same time. If we walked right down the end of the path, you can just see a bit of green at the end of that path, which is the main lawn. And in 1863, I think it was, you would have possibly seen these two gentlemen there. Because we would have come out from here, so walk up here and then down that path. And this is one of my favourite images, again in the archives, and it's only tiny, it's probably like that. And I've got it printed on canvases in my office as well. Not the original, of course, I don't think they'd allow that, but I've got a copy of it. And I love this. It is such an image of the time, because it has ivy going up the wall, and in the archives there's a record saying that the gardener had to climb up the steps every week to clip the ivy away from the window so the Dean had a perfect view of the garden. Because this is the Dean's library, and that is his office, more or less. And it is also the only room that looks out over the back garden. And the path at the moment is still there, but the other, of course, the people in the picture, that's quite nice as well to see two gardeners working in a Victorian picture so many centuries ago. But it is quite telling, because the one in the front is probably an apprentice or something, is wearing a flat cap. And then behind there, you can clearly see that's a head gardener, of course. Bowler hat. So he's pushing away. The other one is in front of the mower because he's actually pulling the mower with a rope, because it's such a heavy machine and not motorized, of course. The other thing I always find quite funny when I look at it is that all the stripes in the lawn go like that, and yet they are pretending to mow like that. So I love that image. I do want to bring bowler hats and flat caps back as well, but not everyone is in favour of that. But this is what it looks like nowadays. And this is also, if you look on the far right of that picture, this is where we had the banana trees, and that's when I thought, oh, this is quite nice, we've got some tropical stuff in here. And that's a border where there are hedychiums, so ginger lilies in there as well, which are out in the garden here now as well. Really nice. The main lawn is more or less the same, and this particular garden was actually already on the first plan as well. And so that means that this garden is over 1,000 years old. And it is quite special to be a part of that and to change things in there as well and be part of that history. It's a tiny part. You can see the ivy's gone, there's no ivy on the wall. And the wisteria is still in flower. Must have been the same day I took the picture as the other one. But if we look at that border that goes along that wall, so the more tropical one, there's trachycarpus in there, which is really hardy in the UK, so it looks tropical, but it's quite hardy. Banana trees and everything. But on the far left and also on the far right, there's a slightly yellowish one, which I have given some feed since, are two magnolias. And the one on the right is denidata, which is a prehistoric species of magnolia. Slightly smaller flowers than a solangiana, you know, the big purple and white ones, so they're slightly smaller, a bit more like a stellata, you know, the star-shaped one. So they're slightly bigger than that, sorry. It is, yeah, that's a beautiful magnolia. But there is a story behind these magnolias, because there are 5 magnolias that were planted in 1967 in the Dean's Garden, and they were planted by the daughter of a canon and his wife in memory of them. With this plaque in the Deanery saying with special permission and everything, and it tells you where they are, but it also tells you where they came from. And there was a local magnolia nursery in Canterbury, just outside of Canterbury, and it was called Pickard Magnolia Nursery, and Pickard bred several magnolias, so he selected quite a few, and these are 3 of them. I think the top one is called Pickard's Garnet, and the one on the bottom is Lileny. I think the one on the left might be Ruby, I'm not quite sure about that one. But they would have been Pickard's Ruby or Pickard's Garnet or Pickard's Schmetterling is one as well. So all his cultivars officially started with Pickard, but quite often nurseries now not that bit often just call it Ruby or Garnet. But he bred 23 different ones. Most of them were of that Soulangeana type, so those the big magnolias. There were 2 grandifloras as well, which are the ones with the big glossy evergreen leaves and the big white flowers now. One of them is called St. George, which we actually have one on site, and the other one was called Anne Pickard, and that is a variegated one. And St. George is a double flowering one, so it's got the big flowers, but then it's got I think 9 little petals in the center as well, so it's a double flowering magnolia grandiflora. And when the lady who actually tries to get this collection together, when she saw that St. George in the garden, she welled up, because she said, we only know of one other one. And this particular lady is part of the Magnolia group from the RHS, and they are trying to get all of these Pickard magnolias together, and then eventually we're trying to plant them all out around the cathedral in the public spaces, and then get a national collection of them, just to make sure that they don't disappear altogether. Like that variegated one called Anne Pickard. Well, I've never seen, well, I saw a yellow variegated one here the other day actually, but it's supposed to be a white variegated one. I've never seen one like that. So it might as well, might already be lost, because of course with variegation quite often they revert, yeah, and people think, oh yeah, the green grows much better, so I'll just let the green grow. So yeah, that might be quite difficult, but we've so far got 16 out of 23, so we're not doing too bad. With lots and lots of international support as well, so yeah, it's really good. Eventually, as I said, we're hoping to get a national collection of them, and then we can give people a little magnolia trail, and they can walk all around and yeah, have a good look and see all those special magnolias. And with national collections, it's not like you are a stamp collector and you've got them and you keep them to yourself. No, the plan is to eventually, once they're big enough, try to propagate them and try to give them away to other people so they grow somewhere else as well, because the more you grow of them, the more likely it is for them to survive, of course. So that's the whole thing with national collections. It's quite nice. We've already sent some cuttings of the Deanery data off as well, so that's quite good. Now, and then further down the Deanery is this, so it gets a bit wilder. We have some wildflower meadows with some fritillarias there as well. I would love to say they all came up spontaneously, but I did plant them. But some cherries as well. And if you go even further into the towards the end of the Dean's Garden, there's an orchard there with, again, wildflowers under there, which we cut once or twice a year, really, those meadows. So that's that done. So that was the biggest private garden we have. I mentioned national collections a few times with the Magnolia collection as well. Well, I've got, as Mark said, 3 national collections. In case you haven't seen nice looking Achinocloas, these are them. It's a Japanese forest grass, and they love shady spots because normally they grow under trees. I think here, well, we've mentioned it a few times, I think they might be a bit too hot here. Of course, it is a bit warmer here than it is in the UK as well, so they tend to do a bit better with us. But some of them get red coloration throughout the foliage, or some of them in autumn they turn bright red, and that's a nice grass. And I started that collection because I found one, or I knew of one, and then I found a different one, so I wanted that one. Then I found another different cultivar. Oh no, I must have that as well. I can't not have that one. So, and I've now got 20 different cultivars. And with that, if you have national collections as well, you sometimes get a chance to display at Hampton Court Flower Show. in London. And this was the first year I did that, which was in 2016. And you can see all the red pots and everything, and it had quite a lot of media attention because, do you know James Wong here? Yeah, I can't remember what it was. He started something with herbs, didn't he? Grow it yourself, I can't remember. But he came to the cathedral, did an entire item. Joe Swift from Gardeners World then filmed at the stand as well. And that was broadcast on the Tuesday when the show opens on the Tuesday morning. Tuesday evening it was broadcast. The next day my sales doubled, which was quite nice. I actually sold out by the Friday. But also the number one question was, where did you get your pots? And which is funny funny for about 15 minutes, and then you think, I'm here for my plants. But they came from a very local nursery who was very glad to get rid of them because they said nobody likes those pots. And because all the time I told them, of course, I got them from A-Tree Nurseries, and they got so many phone calls they had to order 3 more pallet loads. And then I went back a year later because I'm now using them at home, of course, with other plants as well, but I wanted another one, and they still claim that nobody likes those pots. I got a silver with that, by the way. Then the year after, I got another silver. I wasn't overly pleased with that, actually, but that was a Japanese courtyard garden with the Hackler clovers in there as well. And number one question, you can guess it wasn't about plants, was where did I get that rain chain? And that was eBay. eBay is your friend. But it was a bit annoying because I put far more effort in it, and yet for Endeavour I had the same score. And because I thought I was being quite clever, because I used bits from the cathedral, because it says at the top, held at Canterbury Cathedral, even though it's my collection, but yeah, if I want a week off for it, then I have to mention the cathedral, of course. And I thought, I'll use scaffold boards that have been on the south window project for 7 years, and I'll use those as the uprights. Yeah, they really didn't care about that. And also the stone is all Caen stone, which is the stone the cathedral is made of, and some of those bits were 12th century off-cards or things that had been taken out because they needed to be restored. Yeah, the judges really did not care about that either. I keep trying, but they didn't like the brown moss. There's also this, actually, this is very by the by, this is a Japanese maple. And of course you always have to have your labels correct for the judges. And I got that Japanese maple from a friend of mine who's head gardener at a really nice garden in Kent, a good friend of mine, and he hates Japanese maples. It's a bit like the yellow daffodil story. One of his volunteers gave him a massive Japanese maple, this one. And he works for the Salutation, so I turned it into Acer palmatum aisatsu, which means salutation in Japanese. And the judges did not pick up on that. That was my revenge. And then this year I did another display, and this was a representation or inspired by a Roji garden, which is the garden you walk through as you go into a Japanese tea house. I also used Ophiopogon, and it is one of the reasons I'm actually here, because I've looked into those. So this is the little Ophiopogon here, because that's one of my other national collections, Ophiopogon japonicus. And the Ophiopogons are all on the little plinths, which are made out of mulberry wood that came out of the cathedral grounds. And if you know the Thomas Becket story, there's quite a link with mulberry again. The judges did not care about that. But I got a silver gilt, slightly better, so getting there. So yeah, Ophiopogon japonicus, I mentioned that one. That's another national collection of mine, Spring Gold. It's quite a nice one. We need to get that back. And I got that last year, but my favourite national collection out of the 3 I have is the next one. It's Aspidistra elatior, the cast iron plant. Favourite because there is so much history. There's such a nice link with the UK, even with the Netherlands. I'll mention that in a minute. But the Victorians loved posing next to them. So, yeah, they did, because it was a sign of middle class stature. So yeah, you were sort of making yourself look a bit more middle class if you were posing next to an Aspidistra. And of course, now when my friends come over, or my mother, they have to do an Aspidistra pose. My cat Marvel doesn't really have a choice. He's mainly thinking, are you getting up for food? But yeah, so you have to do that. Because with the National Collection of Aspidistra, you start collecting those postcards, so I've got about 50 of those now. And you also start collecting Aspidistra tables, which are the tall tables. And eventually, in 2 years' time, I'm hoping to do a display at Hampton Court with these, so that's also why I'm collecting those tables actually. And I'm hoping to create a Victorian parlour, because they grew them, the Victorians grew them, I think they were introduced in the 1830s, or late 1820s, by the Dutch, by the way. They introduced them to England. Yeah, and they grew in Victorian houses because they had those gas lights, and the fumes from that would kill any houseplant really, but not aspidistras. So that's why they grew a lot of those. You see a lot of Victorian images with aspidistras in them. And yeah, all that history, and then of course people always say, oh, my grandmother had one and I've still got a cutting of that, and then keep the aspidistra flying. And do you know the song biggest aspidistra in the world? No? I'm going to move to America, definitely. Because I get that all the time. Don't look it up, it's awful. But those aspidistras, so the normal green one, these are 3 cultivars of that. And I think in total I've got about 20-25 different cultivars of that normal green cast iron plant. Tomorrow, I'm quite excited about this. This one is going to be delivered at work, which is called Equinox, which is half white, half green. That's quite a special one. So looking forward to that. But that was one of the reasons I was here as well. So to look into what ophiopogonons you have here, and also at all the aspidistras. And yeah, it's been an amazing week. Thank you to those who've helped me as well. It's been really good. And yeah, thank you for having me. And eventually, that also means that I say, yeah, thank you. I have got a very lazy cat, you may have noticed. He does sleep a lot. Are there any questions? No? Yeah. So,
Magnolias get hit by frost.
Late frost, yeah. They will. Yeah, all the flowers will go brown. Yeah, we haven't had that for the last 2 years, but I think 3 years ago we had what they call the beast from the east, and that was when all the wisteria flowers were gone. It's still recovering from that actually. I think we had 10 flowers on it that year, but also all the magnolias, yeah, were just brown. It's only once every so often.
Here, if Solangiana blooms, you know it's going to frost the next day.
Oh yeah, sod's law. So,
has climate change been affecting your garden? I got a friend in Yorkshire that was talking about last year it was so dry, and
yeah.
he was he was choosing new plants just.
Yeah, well, I think there are far more extremes, definitely. Last year it was extremely dry, and we have open gardens usually at the end of May. The Tuesday after that, it just bucketed down all day, and then the next rain wasn't until, well, drizzle at the end of July. It was really, really dry that year. But then other years, it's been extremely wet. So yeah, it goes from one to the other, and yeah, you have to learn to live with it. And this year it's been a bit better. We've had a bit more rain as well, but it's quite funny because a lot of people always think of England, oh, it always rains. But it is so dry, and especially the corner where we are, so we're quite far in East Kent. It is very, very dry. It's some of the lowest rainfall in the entire UK, so that east side of the UK is quite dry.
So do you have systems in place to deal with the drought? I mean, to keep those lawns green and stuff?
No, don't do anything about the lawns, no. Just let them go brown and they'll recover. Yeah, it's quite quick. The only place that don't recover is on old graves. It's a bit annoying. Sorry. But in the cloisters, you can, in the drought, you can really see where, yeah, in the past people have been buried. And that's where quite often they don't recover. So we have to resow.
Pictures of where the Victorian era landscaping was revealed by.
Yeah, several National Trust places have got a lot of pictures, but it does work like that because it's probably quite shallow under there as well. And yeah, we can't water everything. I don't want to water everything because we're using drinking water basically. So sometimes when it's a new border, we'll give it a bit more water. But generally, we try to find things that will just live in our climate. Yeah, we're the lady behind you had a question.
So this isn't exactly a plant question, but you showed us your favorite photo with the bowler hat gardener, and you showed us the library, I believe it's the library windows ringed with ivy behind it.
Oh, the water tower, yeah.
Yeah, well.
Oh no, yeah, so you're right, the Dean's Library, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
and there was ivy all over it back then. And then you showed us a modern photo of that same
Yeah.
courtyard. And this time, the ivy was removed, and the windows were rimmed with red. Was that paint or brick?
No, they were bricks.
Bricks.
Yeah.
So that was what was repairing the stone that had been.
No,
damaged
that's
by the
because at
fire?
one point the Georgians put, was it Georgians? Yeah, Georgians put bigger windows in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that was probably under that ivy as well, the earlier Georgians. Yeah. But that wall is actually coming down. They need to repair that. You can see, if you look at it closely, well, if you're there, that the wall is actually further forward than the window, and it's really sinking more and more. But it's so difficult because all the stonemasons at the moment are, of course, on the building, yeah, and all those other little repairs are over 5 years. Yeah, it only gets done when there's money for it as well. It's,
So you have the dean who didn't like yellow,
no, the Archdeacon. Yeah.
archdeacon,
Yeah.
which is my favorite color. I wondered if you have any yellow magnolias.
Yes, there are yellow magnolias, yeah, quite a few. They're actually, they're using Magnolia cuminata, which I think is native to the US, isn't it? Yeah, they're using that quite a lot to breed the yellow in there as well.
Because I've noticed on some of the websites in the UK for buying garden plants, which they won't ship here, but I just looking through it. They have lots of beautiful yellow magnolias, which I can't find anywhere around here. And I just was interested.
Yeah, see, I know sort of what Plant Delight sells now. That's about my range of nurseries again. So I'm sure Mark might be able to tell you.
All right, well.
Is there a nursery that sells yellow magnolias here?
Oh, sure, yeah, there are quite a few magnolia specialty nurseries. And even if they would ship plants over here, magnolias no longer can be shipped from the UK to the US. So one more on the list of forbidden items. All right, well, let's give Philip a round of applause.